What's the biggest mistake in communication? Assuming it happened. Just because you spoke doesn't mean they understood. So let's talk about why messages fall flat and how to make sure yours actually lands. My wife and I recently went on a marriage retreat. Honestly, the main goal was just to catch up on some sleep and get a break from chasing our two boys around. The theme for the weekend was courageous communication, which sounded great, but I didn't expect it to hit me as hard as it did. During one of the activities, the facilitator threw out a line that stopped me in my tracks. The biggest mistake about communication is the assumption that it happened. That hit home. It got me thinking about how many times I've assumed I communicated something clearly, only to find out later the message completely missed the mark. It's not just a work thing, it's a life thing. Whether it's talking with my wife, trying to explain something to my kids, or even working with my team, I've lost count how many times I thought I nailed the message, but no one else got the memo. Because here's the hard truth. Just because I said something doesn't mean it was actually understood. In that gap, it's a breeding ground for frustration, unmet expectations, and unnecessary conflict. That retreat made me take a hard look at how I communicate, and it got me asking myself a tough question. How many problems could be avoided if I just made sure my message actually landed? But why does this happen so often? Let's dive into what really is happening when we assume communication has occurred. So first, we're going to dive into the assumption trap and why we think communication has actually happened. We often think because we've spoken, written, or instructed, our message has been received and understood. But communication isn't about your intention, it's about the other person's understanding. So imagine spending $125 million on a spacecraft, only to lose it because of a simple communication failure. In 1999, NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter was destroyed because one engineering team used metric units while another used English units. They both assumed they were working off the same standard, but never actually confirmed it. And because of that, the spacecraft literally burned up in the Mars atmosphere. Now imagine that's your project or your team. You think you're all headed in the same direction, but because you didn't double check the details, everything falls apart. Communication isn't just about saying something. It's about making sure the message actually hits the target. So what are some signs or clues that your message didn't land? You know your communication has failed when you're getting frustrated with people who just don't get it, you're constantly having to explain the same thing over and over, and projects keep missing the mark or deadlines get blown. One of the most terrifying examples of miscommunication almost led to World War III. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the US and the Soviet Union were sending messages back and forth, but the channels were inconsistent. Messages were misunderstood, delayed, and sometimes completely lost. It was only when they established a direct and clear communication that a nuclear disaster was avoided. Now, most of us aren't dealing with a nuclear war, but when communication goes wrong, it still feels like a disaster. Whether it's in your business, your family, or your friendships, assuming you're understood is one of the quickest ways to destroy trust. Just because you delivered a message doesn't mean it was actually received the way you intended, and the stakes are higher than you think. So, how do you ensure your message actually lands? If you want your message to land, you've got to be intentional. You can't just throw words out there and hope they stick. So here's a framework to make sure your communication is rock solid. So this is something I like to call the C.O.D.E method. So C stands for clarify. Make your message simple, direct, and specific. If your words can be interpreted in multiple ways, they will be. O is for observe. Pay attention to how your message is being received. Are people nodding because they understand or because they want you to stop talking? D is for double check. Ask them to repeat back what they heard. It feels awkward, but it's a game changer. And E is for engage. Follow up to make sure the message was actually applied. Communication isn't over when you've spoken, it's over when it's acted on. So here's a fascinating example of someone making sure their message lands. J.K. Rowling, when writing the Harry Potter series, kept detailed notes, timelines, and outlines to make sure the story was consistent and clear. She didn't just hope readers would get what she was trying to say. She double-checked, clarified, and adjusted until it was crystal clear. And that's why her storytelling hits so hard. Effective communication isn't about what you say, it's about what they hear. And if you're not checking for understanding, you're not communicating, you're just talking. Think about a message you recently tried to communicate. How do you know it was received the way you intended? This week, try using the C.O.D.E method and see if it changes the game. Communication only works when received accurately, so don't assume, confirm. Have you ever thought you communicated clearly only to find out later your message was completely missed? Drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And if this episode helped you out, hit that like and subscribe button. It helped me out a lot. And ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more content. We'll see you guys next week. Peace.